We're ready to test our rendering because we want to see rendered reflections in the surface of the ball. I'll tap the spacebar over the perspective view, get in a little bit closer on that bouncing ball. And let's go into the render settings dialog. On the status line, you'll see a bunch of clapboard icons, and the one that has two little dots on it will open up the render settings dialog. Open that up. And the first thing we want to do is change the size of the rendering. Right now it's set to 960 by 540. I'm going to scroll down in this common tab here to image size, and I'm going to enable the switch that says maintain width height ratio because it's already at a 16 by 9 aspect. I'll set the width here to 640 pixels and press enter. And because I had maintain width height enabled, the height was also adjusted now to maintain the aspect ratio. All right, now we go into the Maya software tab and you will see anti-aliasing quality. Aliasing is jagged edges, or what's sometimes known as pixelation. And we're at a low quality settings here. And let's go ahead and render this. I'll get in a little bit closer. And click on the clapboard that has no special icon on it. Render the current frame. And if you look really closely, you'll see some jagged edges here. And you can, in fact, zoom in this render view here in the same way that you could with a normal viewport. Just turn the mouse wheel and you can zoom in, and you can use Alt and middle mouse to position. And you can see that that looks pretty jagged. All right, I'll zoom back out again until I get to near 1 zoom factor. And if I can't get exactly 1, I can click on 1:1 up here. And I can store this image to compare it. And that's this icon, this button right here, Keep Image. That'll just store it in memory so I can compare it to other versions. Back in the render settings, we'll change the quality preset from custom to production quality, and then re-render. We can just click on the clapboard icon in the render view. And now it's much smoother. We can store that as well. Down here, you've got a scroll bar. And if you move that over to the right, then you can see the different versions here. This is the version with low anti-aliasing settings, and that's the one with production quality. And once again, we can get in closer on that so we can really see it. So that's low quality, and that's production quality. All right, zoom back out to 1:1. Okay, so we still don't have any reflections on here. Now we want to turn on ray tracing, and that's also in the Maya software tab. And you'll see ray tracing quality. Open that up and simply enable it. We have some settings here to limit the amount of quality in terms of the number of rays that bounce around through the scene, but we can just turn it on. We don't really need to worry about these. And what ray tracing does is it sends rays out from the camera, and if that ray hits a reflective surface, then a new ray will be drawn off that surface to look around to see if there's an object nearby. And if so, that will contribute to the color of the pixel. So that's what ray tracing is. And it affects both reflections and shadows. We'll do another rendering. And what you'll see here is now the sphere looks almost chrome-like and it has a shadow. Let's store that image. We don't have any lights in the scene yet, but Maya has default lighting that will appear in the absence of any real lights. And that default lighting has ray trace shadows enabled. And as soon as I turn on ray tracing in the render settings, now I'm getting these mirror reflections and I'm getting a ray traced shadow. We can compare that. Here's with no ray tracing, and that's with ray tracing enabled. Now this looks a bit too intense. It looks almost like a metal sphere, so we need to reduce the reflectivity. I'm done with the render settings window for now, so I can close that. I want to select the sphere and go into the attribute editor, and I can use the keyboard shortcut Control-A. Go into that blend shading node and scroll down into specular shading, and you'll see reflectivity. That's the amount of reflection, and it's set to 0.5 by default. Be aware that all new blend shading nodes have a default reflectivity of 0.5. So if you're not careful, you can create a whole bunch of blend objects and then turn on ray tracing, and suddenly all those objects will start reflecting each other. Usually, most objects don't have a mirror reflection, and you would turn that reflectivity down to 0. In this case, I do want a mirror reflection, but I just don't want it to be this strong. I'll reduce that reflectivity down to a value of 0.15, and then do another test rendering. Okay, that's much better, and I can store that image too. We can compare these. That's with reflectivity of 0.5, and that's reflectivity of 0.15. Okay, now we can make this even better by adding a bump map on the ball, and that'll make it have some texture or roughness, and that'll break up these reflections, and it won't look so metallic. Let's do that. So back in our blend shader, we've got a bump map, so we can click to add a new render node. And this will be a procedural 2D texture. I don't have a file associated with this. I just can add a simple noise texture. Go up here to 2D textures and choose noise. And once we do that, we see the bump 2D node in the attribute editor with the default bump depth of 1. Let's see what that looks like. So if we move this over, we can see that it looks pretty strange in the viewport. And if we do a render here, it's going to look pretty strange as well. Just to speed up the testing process, we can use render region up here. And the way to do that is to draw a box in the render view and then click the button render region. Okay, so that's obviously not what we want. Let's reduce the bump depth. I'm going to bring that down pretty low to a value of 0.02. It's a very low value. Click on render region, and it doesn't look like much because the noise texture needs adjustment too. So let's try a higher value here so we can really see it. Get a value of 0.1. So we've got some roughness there. Now let's go into the noise texture parameters and play around with these. You'll see a little sample swatch here. And it's actually clipping off some of the values. I can reduce this amplitude down so that we don't have these whites blasting out on our texture. Okay, and we can actually see this in the viewport as we adjust it. So we can bring that down to about 0.5. The depth max is the complexity. Because this is going to be a pretty small effect here, I'm just going to reduce that down to a value of 2. Then we have the frequency, and that's the size of the bump effect. And let's give that a value of 100. That's going to increase the frequency. And now you'll see we got a lot smaller noise on here. Cool. Let's see what that looks like in a real rendering. All right, so that's giving us kind of like a basketball-like texture. And then finally we can go back to bump 2D and reduce that depth down again to 0.02 and do a full rendering. Okay, that looks pretty good, and we can store that. Let's compare it. So there it is with no bump, and there it is with the bump applied. So as I said, it's breaking up that reflection so it doesn't look quite so fake. We can zoom in on that, and we can compare it, see it a little bit more clearly. There it is with no bump, and there it is with that bump texture applied. All right, very good. So we're in a good place with our materials. Let's go ahead and increment and save once again. And now we're up to version 4.